Former neo-Nazis, members of hate groups, what was your "I need to get the heck out of here" moment? My uncle was part of the KKK. He was very poor and homeless, and the KKK supplies you with housing and food and pays for things for you. But he tried quitting, and one day as he left a bar, he was jumped by members and had his chest slit open. He had to get around 200 staples, but he still quit. My dad was a KKK member and I became a neo-Nazi skinhead at the age of 14 because it was acceptable rebellion, i.e., I could be a teenager but not risk getting kicked or upsetting my parents too bad. At 18, I married a former Klansman who also had ties to a neo-Nazi group I was in. We bounced between various groups for about a decade after the main neo-Nazi group split, including a year or two where we were both on the state board of the local KKK. There were times I thought about leaving and was having second thoughts, in part because of hypocrisy and how most sectarians we knew lived and behaved worse than they stereotyped other races as doing, and in part because of growing misogyny in the larger sectarian movement. But I was worried about losing all my friends and my family if I did. Being an open sectarian isn't really constructive to making or keeping friends who are not also sectarian. The final straw was twofold. I was pregnant and didn't want to raise my son that way because overall it made our lives worse. Plus I connected with a few people in online pregnancy groups without knowing their race and found that one woman I related to the most was black and married to a white man. My husband had also come out as bi and, during my pregnancy, had told me he was possibly transgender. He had dating profiles online stating this, and I was worried some of our friends would literally kill him if they found out. Very few female stories here. Thanks for sharing. I have an acquaintance who works to help reform Nazis in Germany. According to her, a lot of people leave the movement not because they've had a change of heart, but because their lives have been threatened by their fellow Nazi friends. And since a lot of them have alienated their families and have no one to turn to for support or community, they will often end up in these formal, government-sponsored reform programs. She said that even though a drastic political shift might not be the catalyst for a person to join the program works with individuals over long stretches of time and with the aim of slowly shifting their views through mandated therapy. I should clarify, my understanding was that it was only mandated if they wished to continue with the program and receive their services. No one is required to participate in the program. It's voluntary, and such. She said she's definitely seen some success stories, but has also seen some people who never quite have that change of heart. Who would have thought that Nazis don't make for great friends? I started to get older and learn more compassion. I was a lonely kid and I didn't have many friends. And I already grew up in a xenophobic household, and many of my family members are neo-Nazis, covered with white supremacy tattoos. I discovered a group of older skinhead kids and I fell into it pretty bad. As I was learning more compassion and slowly was shedding my neo-Nazi beliefs, my buddies were bragging that they beat the frick out of another mutual friend of ours when he said he wasn't a Nazi anymore and he was dating a black chick. I was already thinking about leaving the group. It was basically a little gang. Once I found out they were beating up people for leaving, I realized it really was like a gang and I didn't want anything to do with it. I was shedding my racism and I didn't want to be involved. So I thought if I was a piece of crap enough to be a Nazi in the first place, I deserved to get beat up anyway, and if getting beat up meant I could get away for a life away from Nazism, then that was good enough for me. I've still been a neo-Nazi for longer than I've been an anti-Nazi, but I'm looking forward to the day I can say I've been an anti-Nazi for longer than I've been one. Dang, that was really heartfelt. I really wish you all the best and I hope the beating wasn't too painful. My grandma says the reason her father, my great-grandpa, the nicest man I'd ever met in my life, left the KKK in Oklahoma was because a few of the older male members were starting to get handsy with the young daughters of the other members. These kids were under 10 years old and a couple men were caught with hands-up dresses. According to grandma, he told the group he'd rather be surrounded by a bunch of NS than spend one more minute among the company of child perverts. Apparently even sectarians have a line in the sand. We still have the letter from they sent him in 1924 summoning him back to answer questions. I met a gay man. A real, live man infected with the gay. I was raised in a very homophobic home in a rural area, and I always believed gays were bad people. I thought they were rude, self-centered, and bullies. I distanced myself from them until one day I was assigned to work with a flamboyantly gay man. I was horrified. He proved to be one of the nicest, most caring people I had ever met. He was a fantastic listener and good with melding ideas together. That interaction completely changes my outlook on LGBTQ+ people, much to the horror of my conservative family. They are quite uncomfortable that one of my best friends is a gay that uses they them pronouns. I don't know why I didn't think people were decent humans just because of who they are attracted to, but opening my eyes allowed me to meet so many amazing people. Your opening sentence made me giggle a bit. Thank you for sharing this. Not me, but my grandfather evidently was a member of either the Klan or associated hate group back in the 1960s. He became a born-again Christian and walked away from it. There was little evidence of his history as I grew up. I only found out after my mother told me about it after he passed away. If you take your religion completely seriously and not hypocritically, it makes sense he'd do that. Starting with the golden rule. I was raised by white supremacists who were active in the movement in Canada. It occurred when I was 15 when I pretty much stopped just accepting that my parents were right on everything, and talking to my grandfather at the right time of my life, telling me how he ended up in Canada because his brother outed him as a communist and he had to run. I remember how in the heck does a communist raise a fascist? He said he could only give his children his morals and what he thought as right and wrong. But once they were adults, they were responsible for figuring the rest out, and that just as my mother rejected what he tried to impart on her, I could do the same. When your dad is an actual dissident, the only way to rebel as a teenager is go in the polar opposite direction, I guess. Probably explains why a lot of alt-right idiots live in liberal cities also. It's all just a desire to be contrarian. My niece in Romania married a neo-Nazi last year. Or at least we thought he was because of his long Facebook history, sectarian tattoos, prior arrest for hooliganism, etc. I had a 4-hour car ride with him and had a long chat. He quit because he left the Romania for a little while to work in Amsterdam. His co-workers were from all over the world, including African countries and Israel. He realized everyone was pretty much the same after drinking with them and smoking a joint after work. There was nothing about them worth hating. They were doing the same thing he was. He basically quit Facebook and started getting his tats modified, and hasn't touched politics at all since 3 or 4 years. This is basically what changed my opinion about gay guys. I'm from East Europe too. We don't have gays here and it's all a huge taboo topic. Went to the UK, had several friends and classmates who were openly gay, realized that they're normal people just like anyone else, and now I'm kind of ashamed. Not a former neo-Nazi, but I worked with a guy whose dad was in the Klan. Brawl breaks out at a bar, and he's getting boot-fricked. One of our few black bouncers jumped in and saved the guy's life. Dude disowned his dad, got his rebel pride flag tattooed over, and had the dude that saved his life as his best man in his wedding. The feels from that moment were so strong. I used to be very into far alt-right thinking, especially regarding immigrants, Muslims, feminists, and members of the LGBTQ+ community. Once you get sucked into it, you can very quickly go down the rabbit hole. Online forums and communities are a big issue in drawing kids into such toxic ways of thinking, and I don't think they get enough coverage. Anyway, I realized I was on the wrong side and in a chat when I started interacting with the very people I hated. My one friend introduced me to a Muslim immigrant student that was in my science class. He started sitting with me and I discovered we had a lot in common. We quickly became really good friends, and through just interacting with him on a personal level, I began to realize how idiotic my beliefs were. We were exactly the same minus the color of our skin and the God we prayed to. Through seriously questioning my beliefs, I was overcome with shame, realizing how misguided I was. I started purging everything I had learned online and looked at everything with an open mind, and I've done a complete 180. I've started living my life in an actual Christian manner, loving everyone, treating everyone with kindness, caring for the poor, homeless, and oppressed. Going on 10 years of friendship with him. We both consider each other our best friend. Wildest part is he doesn't even know how much of an impact he's had on my life and the debt I'll never be able to repay as far as I'm concerned. Wasn't actually a member, but when I saw that someone I used to be friends with trying to indoctrinate, I got curious and asked for evidence. sources, etc. A lot of their sources for stuff like race equals predisposed behavior and Holocaust denial are usually either related to statistics that are really easy to be faked. Get the frick out of there, but the psychology of how people get sucked into that type of stuff fascinates me. Forgot to mention this, but a lot of the propaganda in those movements revolves around the idea that all other races and demographics hate you is extremely prevalent. I'm white and my husband is black. My dad is a very old school Southern Green Beret who always told me that I was not to date outside my race. My dad got deployed all over and was very much absent for my senior year of high school until a couple years into college. When I finally talked to him, he found out I was attending FAMU, a historically black university, and the first thing he said was, "You're not dating a black guy, are you?" But I was. In fact, I had been with him for years at that point. We were only together for a few months when he put his life on hold to work 5 jobs to help put me through college. My dad was incredibly angry and he essentially disowned me. Years later he met my husband, who was my fiance at that time, and after talking with him for about a half an hour, my big, scary, xenophobic dad burst into hysterics and apologized profusely. It was like switch flipped while he was talking with my fiance and he realized that he was the butthole and he just kept apologizing. It was shocking, honestly, and something I won't ever forget. It's been almost 10 years since that day and he still apologizes and is trying to make up for it. I'm really wondering how your dad could have gone for so long without apparently ever having talked to a black guy before. I wasn't part of a hate group, but I was anti-gay for a long time. My childhood best friend, TJ, was secretly gay his entire life. He didn't tell me ever, and we were best friends since 1st grade. In 7th grade, my family and I moved, so I ended up going to a different school. Wasn't too far away, less than an hour, so TJ and I still remained in contact for a bit, but by 10th grade, we had lost contact. There was never a falling out. We just naturally drifted apart over time. When I was in 12th grade, I reconnected with a mutual friend who told me that TJ had got beaten up badly a few weeks prior because his friends didn't accept him as a gay man. It broke my heart. I have supported the LGBTQ community since. When I fell for a black girl, I think I was trying to fit in and be cool by being involved with people like that instead of actually being xenophobic. I needed somewhere to fit in. I think that's actually pretty common in groups like this. Then spend enough time there, and you actually believe it. Glad you got out early. Not a neo-Nazi, but I definitely had a "I need to get the heck out of here" moment related to them. When I was working through the last bit of my apprenticeship to be a mason, an awesome foreman took me under his wing. One of the smartest dudes I've ever met, and we got along great. I knew he was kind of Jesus Y, but he never took it too far and was kind of the humble servant type of believer. He taught me how to read blueprints, how to run a job from start up to tear down, and was just really a great guy to learn from. He knew I liked target shooting, so he invited me out to his property to do some shooting. I was kind of surprised to learn he'd built his own killhouse type of course, but I was totally down for it. Just seemed like a redneck thing, and honestly kind of a good time. Got out there and there were a handful of other dudes, all very nice and really helpful. It all came to a screeching halt when one of them went to scratch the back of his neck and had an SS tattoo. I just asked him point blank about it and he said, "Oh, yeah, man, I figured you knew. We all met through the nation," meaning Aryan nations. "We were going to see if you were interested in coming to some get-togethers of ours. Don't believe what you've heard out there. We're all just Christian men who want the best for our families." I excused myself, thanked them for their hospitality, and the foreman for his friendship, but it wasn't something I would ever consider involving myself in. The 50 yards to my Jeep were some of the longest steps I'd ever taken, as I half expected to catch a bullet. Took Monday off to go into my employer's office and explain that I felt I was in a bad situation working there and likely wouldn't be comfortable. Last time I saw the foreman, he was sidewalk preaching, talking about how gays are damned. I learned I'm a horrible judge of character. Nah, people are complicated. Racism is rarely on the skin. Raised far-right Pentecostal, the speaking in tongues cast out demons kind, so not technically a hate group, but we hated sins such as gays, premarital relations, gambling, drinking, etc. My world crumbled when I took some shrooms. They didn't expand my mind so much as allow it to think what it wanted to without fear of being instantly struck down by lightning. I took them because my marriage had been falling apart even though I'd done everything by the book, and I wanted to escape for a few hours. I figured I could pray for forgiveness later. In the afterglow of my trip, I came to the realization that everybody was just some dude, ate breakfast cereal like I did, took daily shoots like me too. They had no more right to tell me what was right or wrong than I did. And if I didn't want to live out the rest of my days in misery, I could either get divorced and condemn myself to heck, or I could get divorced and decide the whole thing was bulls. Folks, it's bulls. I freaking love this story. Completely off topic. I once knew a colorblind sectarian. He was born completely colorblind, and he once made me laugh way too hard, because he said this in a most serious tone. "All you greys look the same." Made me laugh. Still does. I remember Dave Chappelle's skit about this blind white supremacist black guy with your statement. Not a neo-Nazi, or even really a group of any kind of note, but a group whose main identity consisted of hating on people. It was mostly just a Discord server, though some of the people who lived near each other would regularly hang out, and occasionally attend protests. I joined because I was under the impression that it was just a group of like-minded people unhappy with the current state of the world. Turns out they were mostly just interested in bitching about how everything was someone else's fault. Crime is all black people's fault. Mexicans are taking our jobs. The Jews run everything. That sort of thing. I mostly ignored the racism because I mostly agreed with their stances on the government. I hated Obama because of his policies. They hated him for that, but also because he was black. The moment I realized I wanted nothing to do with these people was the Las Vegas shooting. To this day, they claim the Sandy Hook shooting was fake, and the evidence they presented was enough to convince me. So when the LV thing happened, I was prepped to believe it was fake, and they were quick to point out how fake it was. I know it's horrible now, but when you don't have any contact with these kinds of things and all you hear is one side story, while fundamentally believing that the other side has an agenda, it's easy to believe a lie. That was until the night after the shooting when my sister told us about her friend calling her on the phone in a panic while trying to escape the shooting scene. Turns out that one of my sister's close friends was at the concert when the shooting happened, got separated from her group, and couldn't reach any of them, so she called my sister. I talked about this in the group's Discord server and the response was to call my sister's friend a crisis actor. We already know the shooting was fake because this or that reason. The phone call was just to convince you it was real. I said they disgusting for trying to trivialize a very real thing where actual people were killed. They called me a sheep. That's when I up and left, and spent a few weeks re-evaluating a lot of what I thought I knew. I actually found out that Alex Jones ultimately ended up retracting his statements about the Sandy Hook shooting, which was something I didn't know. All the group had focused on was that, well, if this well-respected individual believes a conspiracy, then the conspiracy has credibility. Sometimes I wonder why I ever bought into that. TLDR. Discord server of super skeptic conspiracy theorists, and saying it that way makes it sound as crazy as it was. Believe that society's problems are everyone else's fault, specifically non-whites. I left when they tried to convince me the Las Vegas shooting was fake, after I heard an eyewitness account of the event from someone I trust. Online mom groups work in a similar fashion. I don't know if this qualifies, but I grew up mainly with my mom. I was born in the early 80s, so in the early 90s my mom made me aware that my grandfather, her dad, was in a club. I only understood that it was literally a fairly deeply connected local mob, and those meetings and Christmas gathering and all that were more or less covers for setting up laundering businesses, etc., until I was much older. In any case, they were all extremely xenophobic people. Everyone was involved in this, from plenty of local law enforcement to city council members and everyone in between. My grandfather had mentioned to me at a young age that I would be in the club one day and that he would be proud of me. My mom has always been fairly open-minded in that one of her best friends was openly a lesbian when that definitely didn't fly in my area. She was also friends with plenty of black people and even dated a pretty cool biker black dude for a while. I never had any problem with any of this, as I was simply raised to look at everyone as just people. My mom instilled that in me. So flash forward to a few years later. One day, Apparently my grandfather found out that my mom was dating cool biker guy that happened to be a black dude and basically told her over the phone that he had to disown her for doing so. The phone volume was loud enough that I could hear nearly most of the conversation. My mom was extremely upset and crying on the phone with him. She hung up and then explained what was happening. I was a bit shocked that what he had said to my mom was so hurtful and hateful. A little time had passed and I had come to the realization that he literally hated that my mom was seeing someone that was only nice and great to my mom and myself. I told my mom I was pee off and I was going to call grandpa. She told me not to, but I did it anyway. I called up my grandpa and yelled at him, telling him that I didn't want him talking to my mom anymore and that I didn't want to ever join his stupid club that steals from people and hates other people for no reason at all. I was only 12 at the time, but I look back on that and realize that I understood exactly what I needed to about people close to you being total pieces of crap. This may not be an ex-member of a hate group response, but rather seeing the signs early and knowing to stay away and not to go down that road. I wasn't a neo-Nazi, but I grew up in a family of Baptist missionaries. Third generation. Our organization has been on the news. They've had some horrifying policies. When we moved back to the States for an extended period, I treated my school like my mission field. Santa is the devil trying to distract you from Jesus, I argued with my science and history teachers. I believed the earth was 6,000 years old, and that Christianity was the first and oldest religion. In my teens I started studying theology more intensely. Things got weird. My teenage rebellion was to become hyper-Calvinist and switch to a smaller, stricter church. It was the Bill Nye and Ken Ham debate. I was so excited. My family made popcorn, etc. I was thoroughly disappointed by the end. I wanted a debate, and Ken Ham just gave a sermon, while I heard Bill Nye actually arguing and making points. I had been involved in a Facebook argument before it started about the debate. It continues during and after. I was feeling vulnerable, I guess, and I was doubting my beliefs. I may be the only person ever to have been convinced I was wrong via a Facebook argument. It was when my dad said Bill Nye is so blind that I was stuck with the thought you're so blind, and I really realized I had been blinding myself. We were all blinding ourselves about the whole dang thing, and using faith as an excuse. I bet Bill Nye would be so happy to hear he helped you believe in science. I was a part of a political part with a heavy anti-immigrant stand who had a reputation of beating up immigrant workers. I was young and stupid. Only later I realized if someone who was barely modern as me and couldn't even speak the language of the land can easily find a job and work here, then something was wrong with me. I felt humbled and became an immigrant myself and emigrated the greatest immigrant country of all. Not my story, but a friend's. Her father had a friend that turned to be part of the KKK. He believed everything they said and tried to pass the ideology to the family. Then his son got married to a black woman and the dad decided to quit because he thought having his son around in his life was more important. Not technically a hate group, but I was raised in a religious family that hated gays and lesbians. I figured out just how horrible and stupid that was when I got older and realized I was gay. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.